So we are going to be recording this session today, and we don't have too much in the way of slides. I'm going to flip in and out between the slides, but don't feel like you have to capture them or anything. We will be sending those slides after, as well as a link to the recording. So everybody will receive that after, as well as people that weren't able to make it today. So I want to start by saying that we really believe it's important that we connect with our Indigenous ceremony and that we learn how to integrate and indigenize our systems. We're currently hosting this event on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We're all settlers here, and many of us are immigrants and newcomers, either from this generation or from past generations. And we'd also like to acknowledge those who were brought here forcibly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, and to honor and pay tribute to those of African origin and descent. It's really so critically important that we keep the need for justice, equity, and inclusion top of mind in everything we do. And that's something that we've really been putting a lot of focus on at RAMP in the recent time. So joining me for the webinar today, I'm your moderator and host for the day, and joining me is our VP of Strategy at RAMP, Tina Fernandez, and as well Allen Davidov, who is the VP and NFP practice lead of business consulting at Environics Analytics. So happy that both have joined us today, and I see that they're waving at you, so that's good. I'll pass it over to Allen to give a few bits on Environics, but just briefly who we are at RAMP. Some of you, I saw the registration list, and I know many of you, but some of you may not be familiar with our firm. So at RAMP, we really believe that everyone has the ability to impact their world, and we really want to be part of that change. It's been something that's really been important to us since the agency was founded back in 2011. Our team is really constantly pushing for the smartest and most impactful ideas that can ultimately change how people think. At our core, we're really a branding and communications agency, as most of you know us as. And for the last 9 years, we've been really helping organizations to connect their purpose to the people that matter most to them. We're happy to share some of our expertise with everyone here today on the topic of brand health, and it's one that's quite timely right now. So I'll pass it over to Allen, and he can provide a brief introduction on Environics before we get started.
Thank you, Shelley. Hi, everyone. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces, or at least names, and I know the faces behind those names. For those that are not familiar with Environics Analytics, we help organizations achieve their business objectives by delivering actionable donor and market insights grounded in data and analytics. So we do it in 3 buckets. First one is data. We have over 30,000 different data points in Canada at the postal code level. So things like behavioral data, which we'll get into a little bit through our discussion around brand health, financial data, psychographic data, those kind of things. As well as the second bucket is more the analytical side. So whether it's mining, whether it's modeling, or segmentation, we do a lot of work there. And then the third one is more so product-based. So different tools that we've provided our clients, similar to the ones that we use, to help them do the work on their own. So teaching everybody how to fish, and then helping them better understand how to do that. So that's what we do at Environics. And I'm excited for today's session and talking about brand health, and also bringing the data and analytics perspective to the conversation. Thanks, Shelley.
Okay, thanks, Allen. So just a brief introduction on the topic that we're going to talk about today. This is something that's really been top of mind. I think all of the conversations that I've been having with other marketing leaders, and in particular focus on the nonprofit sector, it's really understanding brand right now has been really top of mind for everybody. So we thought that it was really timely to do this webinar at this time. Examining your brand regularly and considering the health of your brand is something that is always important. But I think that, our resilience as organizations has certainly been tested in 2020. And that has, created more of a focus on brand, I think, for a lot of organizations. I think this year, more than any other in recent history, everyone can really relate as individuals, organizations, and brands. Like, we're really all being forced to reflect on who we are and how we behave. You know, you might be one of the organizations that's found your core identity and what you believe in is being put to the test. The needs, we're hearing this all the time, the struggle, the needs of the communities that we're serving as organizations have really increased exponentially. And at the same time, your ability to then deliver those services is being compromised in so many ways, whether it's lack of fundraising, whether it's, you know, struggles with channels that you normally were accustomed to delivering services in. And many of you have been forced to behave differently, and some organizations may be wondering, who are we now? For some of you, I think 2020 has created shining moments of coming together. We've talked to so many organizations also that have undergone real transformation in terms of adaptation or responding to community needs, maybe in ways that they didn't think were possible, organizations doing things more quickly than maybe they never thought were possible. And so I think all of that change and flux and everything that we're doing is really makes it a perfect time to think about your brand health and as an organization, what you're doing. So with that, I'm just going to go back to the screen sharing here, and I will flip to the next slide, which outlines, why is it not, okay, which flip to the next slide, which talks about what we're going to cover today. So this was in the abstract that that was shared with everybody that you registered for, but we're going to talk about what the key components of an annual brand health check would be. And, you know, I think, you know, it seemed clear to me from the comments that we were reading in terms of what everybody was hoping to get out of this session, that most people are fully, you know, understanding that your brand is more than your logo. But sometimes when we talk about brand, people gravitate to name, logo, visual identity, and, you know, your brand health is so much more than that. And so part of today's conversation is going to be what those key components are. We'll talk about some of the different metrics and assessment tools, some of the quantitative and qualitative approaches to assess where you might be at on some of those dimensions that are important to brand health, and then the role that data and analytics can play in supporting you in that. So that is a plan for today. The format that we're going to use is we have 5 questions. And I'm going to raise each question and then I'll turn the screen sharing off again. We prefer that you're able to see the speaker more clearly versus looking at a slide for the whole time they're talking. So I'm going to dig right into it and get going. And the first question I'm going to kick off with Tina. And the first thing that we think is important to think about when you're thinking about your brand health is really, what is that brand story that underlies your health? Is it really grounded in a true sense of purpose? So the first question is all around this. How does purpose in your brand story really fit into your brand? So Tina, I will turn it over to you to take that one while I stop the screen sharing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we'll get started with, quite honestly, probably one of the most important questions that you should ask yourself and that we ask ourselves with working with our clients is, circles around your brand story. And the importance and why your brand story is so important is because it is grounded in your purpose. So what tends to happen a lot of the times for a lot of organizations is that the purpose isn't about your why, but it becomes about your what. And that's where a big mistake can happen, because what you're not doing by defining yourself by your what is identifying a differentiator for you. So it's important to understand your why. So your why is about what do you believe in? What is your purpose? Why do you do what you do? And how you know if your brand story is off, probably in a couple of key ways. First of all, you do talk about your what. So you describe what you do, how you do it, why you excel at what you do. That's part of your story, but it's not at the core. It shouldn't be at the core. So what you should do is go back and understand and define really clearly your why. So the best question is, what do we believe in? And it's such a great discussion, and we have this a lot internally and with our clients, is really getting to the core of what is it that you believe in? And then from there is how you would build your story. So that's a key tell when you look at your story and what your brand story is, and it's grounded in your what instead of your why. The other thing that happens when your brand story is off, you start to see a difference in the target group and who you're attracting. So if it's not exactly who you envisioned your target to be or who you outlined your target to be from the get-go, then your story is off. When you clearly articulate your why, who you are, why you do what you do, then the story behind that why starts to resonate with people who share your values. That's really what your why is about, is understanding and communicating your values. And those are the people that are going to support you and engage with you, because people do really connect with their hearts and not with their minds.
That's great. And just to add to that, I'm going to start with sort of putting my marketing hat on from previous roles. And it's funny because I'm sitting here with one of my mugs from a previous role. I'll just show everyone. And when I look at this mug, complete coincidence, I actually have it today. I think about the rebrand that I led when it came to Sinai, and just looking at understanding the purpose. And because we understood the purpose really clearly and really well, it was easier to rebrand the organization and move ahead to know how do you sort of pivot in, using the most popular word of 2020, and sort of then kind of change your branding and get everyone on board. And I think that's really where a lot of organizations need to really understand if your purpose is clear, because it'll help you pivot. Because I know I get a lot of questions from clients and just in discussions about how do we change and go online? How do we move and sort of understand how do we act during COVID or during Black Lives Matter and all the social unrest that's going on, and the conversation around diversity and everything else? How do we bring our brand into that? And a lot of the times when you kind of dig into that, it's really the companies that do really well in those areas or those times are the ones that understand their purpose clearly. So this way they can make judgment calls and understand how to pivot and move, because it'll be more authentic, more transparent, and it'll seem more genuine. And that is another great indication, just to add on to Tina's comments, where brands really understand their purpose and what they're meant to do, whether it's service or product or whatever it may be, or in the not-for-profit, you're looking at fundraising and volunteerism and advocacy. It'll be easier to pivot in those times or during those times if you really have a good, deep understanding of your purpose. Then the questions that you'll be asking yourself will be easier to translate and understand.
Mm-hmm.
From a data perspective, another great way, and we are going to talk about this a little bit later on, but just I know that Tina brought it up, which is a great point, is also how you're connecting with those consumers or the persona or people that you're trying to engage with. So what we do at Environics, we don't look at it from a corporate perspective. We look at it from a donor perspective or volunteer perspective, consumer perspective, at the household level or postal code. And we look at values. So the psychographics. How is your message resonating? How's your story and your purpose resonating? And there's a way to align that. And that's really a great sort of check-in to say, are we still on purpose? Are we still talking about our story in a purposeful way, that we're connecting in the right way with the right target? And some of that you can pick up, and I know, again, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this, but just more so about, are we hitting on the right values? Are we hitting on the right tones and the messages? And it's really easy to kind of judge that on a program basis, fundraising campaign basis, or when you're making those judgment calls about how do we move sideways to deal with all the social issues everyone's talking about, or the sort of economy issues that we're all going to be talking about probably for the next little while. How do we make judgment calls on all of those things that will impact revenue, that will impact engagement, that will impact our organizations as a whole? So there's great data behind that to really dig into the psychographics. And that's sort of, from the Environics perspective, what I would layer on what Tina said, rightfully said, was you can kind of evaluate and look at it from that perspective.
I was just going to add one more thing you made me think of there, Allen, was, over the past 4 or 5 months, as organizations and brands look at themselves and in terms of the change that's happening and how do you communicate and to whom, it's important to note too that it's not about changing if you notice, what you believe in hasn't changed. It's how you communicate it, or to whom, or where, or what do you say that is different. So it's really important to stay true to your why, and relook your what or your how. And what tends to happen, especially with something like over the last 4 or 5 months and 6 months that everybody's been going through, is mistakenly we start to change our why, and suddenly you're actually not who you were and who you intended to be. And that's when you start to attract a target audience, and you think, wow, that's what's happening to our loyal base. This isn't who we were meant, who we wanted to communicate to. And that's probably because you've shifted focus off your why and turned it into leading with your what and your how. So there really is a difference, especially when we're tested like we have been.
Absolutely. And this is where the conversations start around, adding to that is just more about, should we be out fundraising because we're not a hospital or we're not COVID related? And I would throw the example of cancer. Cancer doesn't stop just because COVID's around, or other health related issues, or, when it comes to food insecurity and other causes that we've all heard about. Those important things don't stop because COVID and the pandemic has hit, or the economy has been on a downturn. In most cases, those things kind of get elevated because of the importance. But there's a lot of organizations that have, I've been, again, part of conversations where our clients have come to us saying, well, we don't know how to react to this because we don't know if we're as important, or, we're going to be going up against Black Lives Matter. Again, I'm just going to bring it up because it is obviously in the news and it's important. But other social sort of discussions we're having, and it's just a matter of, then maybe you don't know your purpose, or your purpose is not very clear, because that should signal to you how you can act and should act, and do it in a transparent, meaningful way with your donors. So again, coming back to Tina's point, I think it's a great time to kind of reflect, obviously, given where we're at. But this is something that, can help answer the board related questions, the staff related questions. What are we going to do, or what should we do? And kind of give you that gut check to say, what's our purpose, and are we moving in the right direction, and does this fit?
Yeah. Thanks, Allen. I was going to say that I think recognizing how it informs your team and your team's engagement, and can kind of gravitate everybody in your organization around something common as well. So it's both internal and external. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to advance ahead to the next question. And I also want to remind everybody that you can also place your questions in the chat. If you have questions throughout the presentation, when you're thinking of them, feel free to place them in the chat. We're monitoring that. We'll probably leave most of the questions to the end, but if there's one that's particularly relevant to a specific section, we can try to jump in on that. So the next question that I'm gonna have Allen kick us off with this one. The next thing you want to think about when you're thinking about your brand health check is, who are your audiences and how have they changed or evolved perhaps since your last brand health check? And how do you see that changing? And what can that signal, either positive or negative, towards the health of your brand? So I'll have Allen kick off that one.
Great, thank you. So in terms of evaluating audiences, we do this by looking at your CRM and sort of those that are engaged, your constituents, and looking at different markers to say, today, this is what your audience looks like 2 years ago or 5 years ago. This is what your audience has looked like, or we do it by programs. It's also important to kind of look at it from specific campaigns or activities that you do. And it really helps you understand, coming back to that first point, is it the audience that you were expecting, or are you attracting new people? And it's important to take a look at this because obviously there's a message you're putting out there and they're connecting to and they're coming to you. So it's important to kind of evaluate that from the audience perspective, just to see who are those different personas of people, if I can use that terminology, and how are you connecting with them? So what's rooted in all of that? And another part of that that's really important to see how your audience, has it stayed the same or has it changed? Or is it sort of looking like what you're hearing, is also looking at the opportunities that they've presented to you. So if you're obviously attracting wealthier donors from a specific campaign, it's important to kind of take a look at that and evaluate that to see, is there a root reason why this is happening, whether it's your messaging, what you're trying to fundraise for, the time that it is. It's important to kind of take a look at that, but it also gives you that opportunity to say, if we are attracting wealthier donors, then obviously we have an opportunity to get our pipeline filled with people that have more money to help on the revenue side of things. If we're getting more millennials and they're interacting with us differently, then it's a good opportunity to kind of pause and look at, is this just programmatically or is this organizationally that this is happening? And what does this translate when it comes to our annual plans or sort of mid or longer term plans with that specific cohort of people? So whether if you're fundraising or trying to get advocacy moved forward in terms of a specific health matter or education or whatever it is, those things are important to kind of track so you know how to react and how to plan moving forward. Because if the expectation is you're getting the same types of donors all the time, it's not changing without looking, then you're kind of doing yourself an injustice, because it's harder to plan properly when it comes to revenues, when it comes to activity, and also say with any sort of positivity or confidence, I guess, what the outcomes will be. Because if I'm trying to fundraise for a major gift campaign and all of a sudden all these millennials have been attracted to my cause, if I'm charity water or whatnot, it's going to be harder to hit 200 million than it is to hit maybe $1 million, because they act very differently. So again, that's why I think audience is really key to kind of keep on evaluating. And we do it, if possible, on a campaign basis outside of just on an annual basis or biannual basis. But it really depends on what you're able to do. But it is another key check mark and check-in when it comes to looking at your brand health, is taking a look at, again, coming back to purpose and messaging. How is that evolving? How are you attracting new people? And what does it mean moving forward? Tina?
Oh, you're on mute.
I was trying to get through one meeting without having someone say to me, you're on mute. Failed already. So yes, I was going to say, I love that new opportunities, new people. When Allen said that if you notice that there are no new people that you're attracting, it really is such an opportunity to see where your brand can expand, instead of having a reaction that says, wow, that's not who we meant to talk to. But if you are attracting new people, then pause and see if it's an opportunity where your brand can expand and can grow credibly, of course. And that always goes back to your why, right? There's always going to be some new people that you attract for one reason or another, which of course is important to know why, but to always measure it against your purpose. I would say too about audiences that something that a lot of the times gets missed is the importance of internal audience as well as the external audience. So internal, we've got employees, there are volunteers, there are members. We've done a lot of work with internal stakeholders in different groups. And it is so fascinating to see how externally your audiences feel a certain way about you, think a certain thing, and you would assume that internally it would be reflected. And that's not always the case. And a lot of the time, surprisingly, they were at opposite ends of the spectrum. So there are dynamics that happen internally. How do the employees feel about the brand, about working at the organization, about what they're doing, about the purpose? And it's not just how they feel, but how clear is your purpose communicated internally. And because obviously what happens internally and the feeling internally will ultimately or eventually show up externally. So it will absolutely impact your brand. And there's that lag in between. But the importance, and we've seen this a lot with different organizations and different brands where there are two stories happening internally and externally. So it's important to keep watch on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that engagement between the internal, external that'll help you move programs along, and also be more mindful of how do you do that, because your internal audience doesn't always reflect what your external audience looks like, to Tina's point. And I know, if you're a board member, a lot of times the board looks a particular way, but the audience and the people that you serve looks very differently. So it's being mindful of different sort of perceptions and messages and how you're engaging, that one doesn't necessarily completely influence the other without a specific view and data and sort of a holistic view on that as well, because one group has a particular everybody shares in that same view or the way they engage.
I think that was the point that was coming to mind for me when both of you were speaking, is I've seen that happen so many times where there's a lot of assumptions about audiences. And one of the things that can really be eye-opening for an organization is to really look at either qualitative or quantitative information and data about real audiences versus sometimes like perceptions that people hold about who their audience is and why that audience is interested. Because, you know, we've seen that happen time and time again in research, is that, you know, the organization's eyes are really opened by the fact that they're learning new things about the audience.
Yeah. And usually you hear from the loudest people that are really either upset with you or really, really happy. You never hear about all the people in the middle. So when you do the research, you kind of see a more holistic picture of everybody versus the people that are loudest or most engaged, which probably makes up less than 1% of everybody in total. So that's why going by gut feel when it comes to audience and sort of is not always the greatest thing either.
So I'm going to just keep things moving along, go back to the screen share here and move on to the next question. For some reason, my down arrow is not working. So our question number 3, the third point in the 5-point brand health check is how well, so, you know, we've talked about audiences and the importance of understanding who our audiences are and are they changing? But this question is really more about how does your audience feel about you and how well is your brand resonating with your audience? And is it resonating for the right reasons? So Tina's going to kick that one off.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would say here and the importance of it, resonating with your audience really means having them fall in love with you, right? So when you think about brands that resonate for you personally and the brands you feel closest to, it's probably because you have fallen in love with them, whether that terminology, whether you would ever use that or not. And that's really what's really important here. So understanding what is it, how do you connect with them? Again, back to your why, the importance of that. It's important to understand whether they've left. You know, we always talk to our current target. Right, organizations will talk to people that they're users, they're donors, they're people that are engaged. But there's huge learning to be had in speaking to people who no longer engage with you, and maybe not rejectors, but just lapsed donors, lapsed users, people that at one time you were important to them, the organization was important to them, and maybe not so much anymore. And it's so important to understand why. And it might not be about trying to get them back, but it might be about understanding the evolution of your organization. Somewhere was your brand story not clear? Was it watered down at some point because there was a shift in focus? So it's really, really important to understand and to talk to people that were engaged with you at one point and that are no longer engaged with you today.
Yeah. From the Environics standpoint, one of my favorite data sets is our Psychographics data set. I talk about this often, and a lot of my team probably hates hearing it because I talk about it so often, but it's one of the real gems in our data sets because it gets at people's values. It gets at what's important to people. And when you're looking at your brand and you're looking at who you're connecting, understanding the values of your audience really can get to what are the right stories that are resonating. Are you hitting the right notes to get people to react to something? So if you're advocating for better education or poverty, housing, or whatever it is, are those messages coming through? And that a lot of that could be seen to what are the values that match up from your organization to the people that you're talking to? Or if you're looking for fundraising, same sort of rules apply when you're looking at, is there something that people value, whether it's giving back to their community, leaving a legacy, how they respond to brands, do they respect brands. All of those things can really be intertwined in the values of people and how they're brought up and how they live their lives. So when it comes to your messaging and does it resonate, we always take a look at it from that perspective. And again, it comes back to, are those shifting? Are those changing? What are your opportunities? And if you're fundraising, you know, for a big campaign, what are those opportunities with those groups? But what are the values that you can hit on that really will help trigger people to make the next gift or to stay with you during COVID, during hard times, and know that your hospital is really key and important to the community, or that, you know, again, food insecurity is really important because people need it now more than ever. So again, coming back to the values piece, it's really about, are you connecting on those values? And then do you understand which ones you're connecting on? Because then you can take that a step further. Your next campaign, your next creative, your next story that you tell could be that much more powerful if you really understand your audiences and the values that are making those connections between the two. So that's why I love that data set. I could talk about it for hours on end. And it's really helped me out in my previous life before I came to EA and I was a client, just make those connections. And that's, I think, where organizations fall flat, not just because they didn't come up with the coolest, best story or campaign. It's because they didn't understand their audience and they didn't connect from a value standpoint. And I mean, you can refer to that VHS beta conversation, which system was better and all that, and who won out. If we go back, and I might be dating myself a little bit now, when it comes to video recorders and those whole thing, beta was always the better system, but they didn't have the better story and they didn't connect with people. And that's why they lost out when it comes to VHS and beta back in the 80s, 70s. So that is a great example of someone not understanding their purpose and sort of their story and understanding who their audience is and what would help them trigger. So the same rules apply when it comes to fundraising. If you know your audience, if you know their values and you know your own values, it's easier to connect and build that great campaign and story and understand sort of how your brand is doing when it comes to that and relaying the right information.
Great, thanks, Allen. I'm going to keep things moving right along because we want to make sure that we have some time for questions. So the next question in our audit is, so we've talked about, you know, knowing who your audience is. We've talked about connecting on values and understanding how to really ensure your message resonates with them. But what channels do you use? What's the mix? How do you reach those audiences? I think 2020 has been a very eye-opening year for many organizations where there have been new channels put into the mix out of necessity, but this also creates new opportunities. So, you know, thinking about what those channels are. So I think Tina is going to kick this one off.
Yeah, so, okay, on this point, I'll just say that I guess the first question that to ask ourselves in this year is, where is your target? So you always have to always ask yourself, where are they? And by that, we mean, where's their mindset? How are they feeling? What are they thinking? Because, you know, a brand story is really powerful, but it's got to come off of paper at some point and live in communications, in somehow to engage. So being in the right place at the right moment. So understanding where they are mindset wise and what they're thinking will help define the channel mix. And it's really interesting because, again, over the last several months, what everybody's gone through, you're probably in a position, a lot of organizations are, that you have had to behave differently. So, you know, a great example is a lot of the church now is about digital ministry. So they have now had to behave in a way that they've never had to behave in the past. So understanding that it's not just a band-aid to say, wow, the only way we can reach people now is to be online. So let's just do what we do online. It a lot of the times doesn't translate that easily. So it does call for reflection to see, wow, what does our organization look like in this channel mix? How do we behave here that allows us to stay true to who we are and what we promise and what our purpose is, and how we do it, but do it in a way, in a different place that talks to our target in a way that matters to them, and that so that you're credible too, right? There's a risk of losing credibility when you move, especially again in the last while, when you move from one channel to the next, there's a risk of losing credibility if it's not done purposefully and properly. So learning how to behave in a new channel is really important. And that does come from, I know Allen talked about it, when we talk about personas, you know, you understand who your target audience is, but within that audience, there are subsegments a lot of the times. So to understand how each persona behaves within the channel mix is really important as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And a lot of times I know that some charities don't have the abilities to evaluate how their audience is moving or do all of that on a frequent basis. But it is important to take a look every so often and kind of look at, has my audience that we're now attracting changed? Are they more active in TikTok, or are they more active on Twitter to talk about some new channels? And because we're forced to go online to do webinars and other things and engage, is that where my audience is? And is that where they're getting their information? Because there's a lot of great behavioral data out there, but it's really about understanding how to use it and what's the most powerful and what part of that segment you're looking for. Because if they're going on Facebook just to look at pictures, but not to interact with brands, there's no reason for you to be on there just because everybody's on there. And I always go back to, nothing in life is free for any organization. Even if you have volunteers managing your social or assisting your social media or whatnot, somebody still has to help them craft some of that messaging and teach them how to do it. Somebody's time is still being used. So it's really important to understand before a campaign or as you're moving, you know, on the more brand related messaging, where should you be and where's your time best spent? And to Tina's point, where your audience is and how are they behaving in those different mediums? Because people are still consuming newspaper. It doesn't mean that's exactly where your audience is and the best medium for you to use. Or if you're getting free ads from a television station and they're offering you free ads, you have to create those things. It still costs money, but if that's not where your audience is, regardless if they're free, that's still not worth your time or energy or effort, but maybe a nice check mark for a board meeting or an internal meeting. So it's really important to constantly evaluate and understand, how are they acting? How are they taking in messages? And to Tina's point, how can you be authentic and cater your message to that medium so it comes off in an authentic way and engages in the way that you want to do it? So I think it's really key to evaluate that product mix and keep on doing it as you're creating new sort of campaigns and programs. But if you can't, at least do it on sort of a bigger scale on once a year to see how you're doing, and maybe monitor in-house. Maybe have someone, as they're looking through the Twitter account or some of the other social media, kind of evaluate, what are the kind of responses are we getting? Are people engaging? If we're asking them to click on a survey or advocate on our behalf, have they done it? How successful have we done it? So I know there's supports and agencies and great partners that can help, but if you're not at that level, there are also great opportunities for you to do it in-house, to start that evaluation and understand how you're doing. So then when you do get an opportunity to work with a RAMP or an EA or anybody else, you're bringing information to say, we've tracked this through Google Analytics, or we tracked it on our website, or we've tracked how we're doing on Twitter, and this is sort of how we're seeing things translate. So we've tested different things. We've tested our newsletter, and we've learned from it and sort of tweaking things as we go. So there's the inexpensive way, and I know there's a lot of small not-for-profits that have registered today and just are sort of trying to figure it out. And there's sort of the partnership way as well. But it is important to constantly be evaluating and looking, because your audience does shift and change where they are at and how they receive messages. So just to add to what Tina was saying.
This is one where it's come up for a lot of organizations in light of COVID, but even without the 2020 year that we've had, that's created so much change and pivoting and such. I think this is an important question to ask for your brand health check at any time. It's just that a lot of organizations have sort of been forced to look into this one this year, but it's always really important for all those reasons that were stated. So our last question is really about how we measure all this. The last question is, so, you know, we've talked about the questions 1 through 4 that you see on the right side there, but how do you know if you're on track, and what are some of the measurement KPIs, benchmarks, things that you can follow as an organization to say, okay, where do we stand? So I think Alan's going to kick us off for this one.
I get the hard question.
There's so many things that you can talk about here, right? You know, it's a big question. We could almost do a whole webinar just on this, but.
Yeah, absolutely. On a broader scale, you know, from a marketing perspective, as marketers, we all look at unprompted awareness, prompted awareness. We all look at those as some of the bigger markers and some of the surveying that we do around that to understand how our brand resonates. On a more frequent basis, looking at different KPIs, you can create KPIs in sort of an understanding outside of just revenue, but looking at how are people interacting with your newsletter? So open rates. How are people engaging with your social media or your website? Looking at how some of that sort of has changed over time, and you can break it up by quarters, you can break it up by an annual basis, again, campaign, but those are some of the measurements that you should be looking at to say, how do they sort of come up and level up to the bigger ones, the unprompted and prompted awareness, and sort of also help understand how that ties back to your business goals. So understanding if you move something by 1%, what does that mean for audience size, donation size, volunteer size, advocacy size? So I think this question, we can do it all day long, but I think that some key things to walk away with is looking at the areas that you're focused in on, and then see some of the trickle down, like what are the different sort of engagements that you're having as a brand, and evaluate how that sort of has changed and moves on a smaller time frame. And then looking also at industry averages to see how far off are you and what gains can you make if you're below, that will help move things along, and kind of evaluate yourself, and then evaluate yourself based on history.
Yeah, Tina, you're on mute.
Twice? Seriously. So the important thing here, I would say, is, you know, it really does beg the question. If we ask, how do you know if you're on track? Well, where did you want to end up? And what that does is forces you to go back to your end goal that you would have set at the beginning. So it's so important. It almost sounds really obvious, but it really isn't, as you get caught in understanding how and implementing different tracking systems, perhaps, that you kind of lose sight of where you wanted to end up. So it's so important to go back and establish again your end goal at the beginning, and then knowing the importance of where you are at any given time. So to reevaluate your objectives, not just your end goal, but the journey. There's objectives along your journey, and it's really important to understand and to reevaluate as times change and as we're forced to change, as we have been in the last while, to see whether those end goals still make sense for you. Are they still achievable realistically, even with the change that you may have had to make? So keeping an eye on your objectives and your end goals along the way is really important as it is as measuring.
Yeah, do you want to talk too a little bit, Tina, about qualitative versus quantitative measurement techniques, and, you know, why the mix of both is important, and what people can learn from each?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually was thinking about that up front in one of the first questions, where it's about brand story and how that influences, because that's such an important part of all of this, the brand story. That's oftentimes where we do a lot of the qualitative work and qualitative research, because it allows us to explore and to put forward several iterations of the brand story once you land on your why and your purpose. And then it allows us to actually explore and go deep, and it informs quantitative research as well, right? So a lot of the qualitative work that we do is about exploring what resonates, what's credible, what's the elasticity of your brand. You know, we talk about that a lot internally when we're working on with different organizations. But the importance of that is to understand, everyone wants their organization to stand for something big. And in the end, what we have to figure out, and part of the qualitative research for the brand story is understanding how believable is that and how far can you push it. So qualitative is really powerful in doing that. It's also really powerful in understanding your target audiences. We use qualitative a lot to understand the nuances, the subsegments, to create our personas for the different target audiences, to understand what their beliefs are, how they feel about you, and just how they are as people. Who are they? What are their attitudes towards life? So it's such a wonderful way to get that rich information to better understand your target. So those are a couple of the ways that qualitative helps a lot.
Great, great. So we could go, as we said, on all day about metrics and KPIs, and maybe we need a follow-up topic just on that one with some more details. I'm going to move things along just because we are almost out of time. I want to make sure that we have time to take some of these audience questions. So I guess what we just want to leave you with for a moment here is, if you're thinking about where is my organization at, do I need to dig into brand health as something? Should this be a priority? Is this something I want to make a case for to our board or to our leadership team that we need to focus on? Is it something that you want to put resources, that have your team work on in the coming year? I think here are some. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but here's a simple checklist that you can go through. And I think if you find that any 1, 2, or 3 of these things are true for your organization, then it's probably a good signal that in somewhere in these 5 areas that we've talked about today, there might be something that's not quite aligned. And so this would be a good time to consider digging into your brand health in a little more detail. So we'll leave you with that. As I mentioned, we will share these slides. And at this point, I just want to say that everybody should, if you have any questions for Tina or Allen or myself, please put them in the chat box. And if you don't have any questions, that's okay too, but maybe feel free to let us know if you have any comments, or if there's any other topics that you'd like to hear more from us on in the coming days. So I see one comment from Deb. Thanks for a great session. Very helpful and insightful.
Thank you, Deb.
I'm not getting any questions off the top, so I don't know if either of you had any, just while we're waiting for people to formulate their questions and maybe type them in, if any of you had any other closing thoughts or anything you didn't get to mention earlier.
I think I would throw one out to you guys, actually. From the agency perspective, looking at different brands and kind of approaching, I'm sure you get a lot of questions now. How do we pivot a little bit with our brand on and whatnot? Is there one thing that stands out most that people are kind of coming to you during COVID and during this, I guess, 2020 year that's been sort of unexpected? Is there something that kind of sticks out outside of the topic that, outside of the points that we've mentioned today?
I think one thing for me that I've noticed a lot of organizations experiencing, not just since COVID, but even beforehand, is that that lack of internal alignment, I think, is a big one. We work with a lot of organizations that are national in scope or even international in scope, and some that are in federated models. And there's a lot of complexity in these organizations in terms of a variety of locations, maybe across Canada, maybe some locations globally. And there's a lot of heart for the cause and a lot of great work that's happening, but it's kind of happening in really disconnected ways. And so you get organizations where the momentum, they can't catch the momentum and really kind of catch that wave, because they're all sort of doing something a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there. And so some of the organizations that we've had been working with in the last year or so have really been able to uncover where those points of disconnection are, whether it's between that internal audience or the external audience, and try and really formulate that more cohesive brand platform and brand story that then everybody can get behind. And, you know, when you put that on paper for people, it might like look simple. It might only be like 5 or 8 slides. And at the end of the day, when you look at it, sometimes it even seems like, oh, well, it was obvious, but it's not to everybody. And I think that's like the biggest thing that we've seen has really helped organizations move the needle, is just getting everybody on the same page, literally, has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We do have a question. Amber kind of posted one here saying a lot of your presentation was geared towards business to consumer. In a short soundbite, how would you gear these 5 questions towards business to business? Do you guys want to jump in here? Get us started?
Yeah, do you want to start, Tina? You're on mute.
Yeah, yeah, I know. No, I'm actually not. Okay.
Now you're not.
Yeah, I would say, you know, when I look at the questions, what is your brand story? That is still really important. We've worked with a lot of in the B2B category as well. And when I look at these questions, so with what is your brand story? Is it grounded in your purpose? So that matters as we work with B2B. That plays a huge part as well, because that is about establishing and communicating who the organization is and what the business is and what you do and why you do what you do. So that still absolutely matters for B2B. Understanding the stakeholders involved. I mean, in some B2B businesses, we've worked with investors, and it was important to understand, even within the investment target investors, you know, institutional versus retail. So understanding that was important. So when I look at these questions, and unless Alan, from the measurement end for you, if that would show up differently, broad stroke, like looking at these overall, they feel like they would matter to whether it be in B2B or B2C.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. From the Environics perspective, the times that we do more B2B is when it comes to sponsorships. So when we look at sponsorship, we still ground it in consumer behavior. So brand consumptions, to understand within an organization, what are your donors and constituents consuming in order to actually go and approach an organization when it comes to sponsorship, to make it a meaningful connection. And I think the same thing happens, you know, from the brand perspective, it's how do your brands align from that perspective. But I think to your point, a lot of it still kind of feels like it's very adaptable for those situations as it would to business to consumer when it comes to brand. It has to speak to the brand. They have to line up well and understand the audience mix between the two. So understanding what business you're trying to reach. I think the same rules apply.
I would just add to that, that I think that another thing that's important to keep in mind is business to business. Yes, you know, it's one organization selling to another organization, but at the end of the day, it's people, it's human beings that actually make the decisions about the suppliers that they're choosing and the way the business engages. So, you know, I think that some of the points that were made around connecting on values and understanding, you know, who is your decision maker in that B2B scenario, and what does that decision maker really care about, and how can you, you know, connect your brand story for your organization to something more personal and that is going to really matter to that person. So in that sense, sometimes I think a mistake that can be made in B2B is sort of dehumanizing the customer to the point where it's an entity or it's a corporation, but recognizing it is always still human beings that we're making those business relationships with. And so I think some of the human insight aspects are still really applicable as well.
Absolutely. Whether it's making money, whether it's growing your business, whether it's whatever the mission at the end is, there's still someone driving the bus. So, and it's a person, and their decision making is impacted by their values and what's important. So I think that's a great point.
Good. Okay, I don't see any more questions. We're now exactly at 3 o'clock, so right on track for timing, so that's awesome. I would say that when we circulate the follow-up presentation and recording of the session, we'll also make sure to include contact information for myself, for Alan, for Tina. And so if anybody has any one-on-one questions that you want to cover specifically, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we hope that you enjoyed it. We'll also likely be sending a feedback survey with that information that I mentioned earlier. And so please do complete the feedback survey. If there's other topics you'd like to hear us speak on more, or there's things that you'd rather dig into with a more in-depth session, then we'd love to know that so that we can put some additional content together for everybody to help you going forward. I just close with saying, stay safe and stay well. And I wish everybody all the best. Today is September 1st, so enjoy your fall. And like I said, stay safe and well, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.